Welcome everyone to Nicole Longstaff's Capstone Defense, where she'll be defending her capstone entitled Unravelling the Nexus, Exploring the Relationship Between Compassionate Leadership, Symmetrical Internal Communication, Psychological Safety, and Employee Engagement. A bit of a mouthful, but a very important topic. I'm very pleased that her capstone advisor, Dr. Haniye Yousufpour, is with us, as well as Dr. Terry Flynn, her second reader. I am the chair of the session, so I can ask questions if I want. Now, the way this will work is you have 25 minutes to present. If you're a little bit over, it's not the end of the world. Nobody's going to cut you off, so don't feel anxious. But try to keep it to the 25 minutes. Then we go through a round of questions. The first round of questions will go to your supervisor, your advisor. You can ask one or two questions, and then afterwards we'll go to your second reader. Then afterwards I get the chance to ask a question as chair. Then we go through a second round, and if we have time, we go to the gallery. So hello gallery, sharpen your pencils, get ready to ask some questions if you want. Yeah, so that is the way we're doing it. We are 3 minutes in, so you can have until 9:29 officially, and the floor is yours.
Great. Welcome everyone, and a happy Monday. Thank you for joining me here this morning to learn 25 minutes worth of my capstone research titled Unravelling the Nexus, Exploring the Relationship Between Compassionate Leadership, Symmetrical Internal Communication, Psychological Safety, and Employee Engagement. The agenda for today's presentation will start with some brief context and introduction, followed by touching on the literature review and hypotheses development, the research methodology, results, key findings, discussion, contributions to the practice, limitations and future research, and concluding with some acknowledgements and, of course, your questions. So let's begin. So to start, for several years now, my lived experience in a variety of different roles and workplaces has deeply motivated me to learn more about the key variables that support employee well-being, engagement, and high-performing teams and organizations. Dan Buettner's research conceives of the workplace as a Thrive Center, one of 6 domains which affect human happiness over the long term, a place where we spend on average, get this, 90,000 hours of our lives. Given this, I've thought to myself, so many people seem to be unhappy and struggling due to work-related issues. How does spending this amount of time in the workplace impact their sense of well-being and engagement? Can variables such as style of leadership and management, communication, psychological safety in the workplace make a positive difference? And what are the relationships between these variables and others? Is there a recipe for alleviating some of the suffering that is experienced in the workplace and optimizing employee well-being and engagement? So it is with a deep, heartfelt compassion and awareness that I feel driven to explore these questions, knowing that regardless of the differing positions and roles we all play in our workplaces to serve our employers, customers, and clients, at root, we are all connected through our common humanity. We all share a desire to protect and take care of and nourish our loved ones, to feel belonging, connection, to feel valued, and to have our contributions appreciated and recognized. So with this context in mind, when I came across Gallup's annual State of the Global Workplace 2023 report, revealing that low employee engagement is estimated to cost the global economy $8.8 trillion, with an estimated 59% of employees quiet quitting, I thought to myself, to what degree does employee suffering contribute to this quiet quitting and lack of engagement? And can some of the suffering in workplaces be better mitigated and managed to create healthier, thriving workplace environments for people that are optimally motivating, inspiring, and engaging? So it's with these larger questions in mind that I started on a journey of exploratory research focused on investigating the relationships between compassionate leadership, symmetrical internal communication, psychological safety, and employee engagement in workplace environments. While there are several previous studies that have examined each of these constructs and their linkages to employee engagement in different ways, there seemed to be a lack of research exploring their interrelationships. My study sought to address this gap, building upon the existing knowledge base and current understanding of these constructs to contribute to new knowledge and insight for leaders and organizations on how to create workplace environments that enhance employee well-being and engagement. All right, so I'll do a quick run through of my focus areas for my literature review. So first, of course, I focused on compassionate leadership. So essentially, what compassionate leadership is it embodies an intention through behavior to be of benefit to others. Research shows that this style of leadership fosters a workplace characterized by warmth, care, and concern, and is responsive to alleviating suffering. Relevant behaviors include integrity, accountability, presence, empathy, authenticity, and dignity. Second was symmetrical internal communication. So in the existing literature, this process of communicating is described as empowering employees and encouraging their involvement in decision-making processes and engaging managers and their subordinates in dialogue in which they openly listen and exchange feedback. Key characteristics include listening, understanding, collaboration, reciprocity, openness, responsiveness, and tolerance for disagreement. Third, we have psychological safety. As per this established literature, in a nutshell, it's a condition in which one feels included, safe to learn, safe to contribute, and safe to challenge the status quo, all without fear of being embarrassed, marginalized, or punished. In a psychologically safe environment, employees feel they can engage in open communication, seek feedback, and voice their concerns. And lastly, I looked at employee engagement. Employee engagement can be described as a work-related state of mind characterized by vigor, dedication, and absorption associated with extra role performance. According to social exchange theory, it flourishes when employees feel valued and meaning in their work. And as per a meta-analysis of 100 million interviews conducted by Gallup in 2015, 70% of the variance between the highest engaged and disengaged is the relationship with the manager. So no pressure to any managers out there. That I thought was pretty compelling. All right. Okay, so that was a quick taste of the literature review. I worked my way through. And as I learned more and more, I started noticing intersections and possible relationships between the constructs. It was these findings that served as the foundation for the development of my hypotheses. So looking at the constructs of compassionate leadership and symmetrical internal communication, I noticed that the behavioral characteristics of compassionate leadership, as per Schuck et al.'s 2019 Compassionate Leadership Behavior Index and construct, align with and reinforce and support several of the key attributes of symmetrical internal communication. As per Rasmus Hugard and Jacqueline Carter's 2022 research, compassionate leadership behavior includes encouraging dissent, engaging in two-way conversation, and celebrating when people are brave and speaking up, creating a culture of greater transparency, all of which are consistent with symmetrical internal communication. My findings here served as the foundation for proposing the following hypothesis: that compassionate leadership will have a positive relationship with symmetrical internal communication. Now, while investigating the nature and attributes of compassionate leadership and psychological safety across the literature, I noticed several areas of potential interrelationship between the two constructs. One example is Warline and Dutton's 2017 research indicating that compassion helps people greet errors and failure with the open-mindedness and open-heartedness that fosters learning, essentially fostering a climate of psychological safety that enables the discussion of innovative ideas, learning from errors, and talking more openly and frequently. My findings here served as the foundation for proposing the following hypothesis: that compassionate leadership will have a positive relationship with psychological safety. Further, given that the research I had explored suggested a positive relationship with compassionate leadership and symmetrical internal communication, as well as psychological safety, I wondered if compassionate leaders are more likely to engage in open and transparent symmetrical internal communication practices, which in turn would contribute to higher levels of psychological safety. This led to proposing the hypothesis that symmetrical internal communication mediates the relationship between compassionate leadership and psychological safety. Now, several examples of existing research and studies reviewed suggested that compassionate leadership may improve employee engagement and in turn employee performance. The existing research also indicated that when leaders lead and interact with their employees through compassionate leadership behaviors such as empathy, integrity, and authenticity, employees have a higher level of engagement, improving organizational outcomes. As such, I hypothesized that compassionate leadership positively influences employee engagement. And lastly, through my review, I also noticed a growing body of research examining the effects of leadership behaviors on work outcomes through psychological safety. Several studies have shown that leader inclusiveness, trustworthiness, openness, and behavioral integrity all influence employee perceptions of psychological safety, which in turn may drive employee outcomes such as employee engagement. As such, there seemed to be a relationship between compassionate leadership behaviors, psychological safety, and employee engagement, with some evidence suggesting that compassionate leadership may contribute to psychological safety, which in turn may foster higher levels of employee engagement through a mediation effect. Therefore, I hypothesize that psychological safety mediates the relationship between compassionate leadership and employee engagement. All right, so I won't spend much time here, but this is the research model that I put together with the postulated hypotheses I just walked you through. All right, so I'll move on to the methodology. So just quickly, this study used a mixed methods design. This approach included a literature review, as I give you a taste of, quantitative data collected through an anonymous online survey. So it was a sample of 265 respondents, and qualitative insights collected from semi-structured interviews with a subset of survey participants. That was 10 interviews, and essentially through the research tried to draw on the strengths of both. To be included in the study, prospective participants had to be employed in Canada or in the US in a role that included at least some teamwork or collaboration. The online survey design was a compilation of questions that I had selected from previously validated scales designed to assess individual employees' perceptions of compassionate leadership, symmetrical internal communication, psychological safety, and employee engagement in the workplace. While the semi-structured virtual interviews included questions designed to delve deeper into the potential interrelations among the constructs. The volunteer study participants were recruited online from the general public and also through my network using non-probability snowball and convenient sampling. To reach a broader public pool of potential participants, I used paid promotion to publicize the volunteer survey via social media. All right, and so this just gives you a look at the different survey scales that I took questions from for the development of my survey, as well as the scholars attributed to each of them. For each set of questions selected for inclusion in this survey, the Cronbach's alpha was calculated to assess the internal consistency before proceeding with the study. So essentially, this is measuring how well each set of questions reliably measures the same underlying construct. Typically a value depends on, but typically a value above 0.70 is good. And so I was confident that we had good internal reliability to proceed with the survey. All right. Okay, so I just a quick touch on the data analysis. So the techniques and tools for the quantitative data analysis included the bivariate Pearson correlation in SPSS to assess hypotheses 1, 2, and 4, as it measures the strength and direction, positive or negative, of the relationship between the constructs. And for mediation analysis, I used Andrew Hayes' process macro for SPSS for testing hypotheses 3 and 5. And for the qualitative data analysis of the interviews, I conducted a thematic analysis. So did this using in vivo. So I first anonymized interview transcripts from Zoom, then organized and grouped the responses by question, followed by coding patterns and themes, as well as capturing sentiment. All right, so the results. All right, so I won't spend too much time here, but in terms of the participant demographics, so as I said, the sample was 265 respondents. Essentially, majority of those respondents were largely Millennial, Gen X, and Gen Z, full-time employees currently working in Canada in healthcare, educational, professional, scientific, and technical service industries within middle management, upper management, trained professionals or support staff roles that included a significant amount of teamwork and collaboration in those roles. All right, so in exploring the link between compassionate leadership and symmetrical internal communication, the Pearson correlation coefficient was used, as I mentioned before. And so you'll see the results, statistical results in the top right corner, showing a strong positive linear relationship with a high degree of statistical significance, suggesting a high level of confidence that the correlation is not a random occurrence. These results suggest that as compassionate leadership increases, there is a corresponding increase in symmetrical internal communication, supporting the hypothesis. Also calculated was the coefficient of determination to measure the extent of the association between compassionate leadership and symmetrical internal communication. So the coefficient of determination suggests approximately 72.7% of the variability in symmetrical internal communication is associated with variations in compassionate leadership. This significant proportion shows the strong association between the two constructs, essentially highlighting how closely these variables are related. Further support for this hypothesis was found in the interviews, with 80% of interviewees providing accounts that align with and indicate support for this hypothesis. So yeah, and I did include a quote here from one of the respondents, R2. I don't have time to get into it, but essentially, through the interviews, there was quite a bit of anecdotal data that really lent support to the quantitative results. So I've tried to include that with each slide. So let's move on here. Okay. So for hypothesis 2, the Pearson correlation coefficient indicated a strong positive significant relationship between compassionate leadership and psychological safety, with a p-value of less than 0.01. Indicating a high level of confidence that this observed correlation is not likely due to random chance. The results suggest that as compassionate leadership increases, there is a corresponding increase in psychological safety, supporting the hypothesis. Further, the coefficient of determination indicates that approximately 52.3% of the variability in psychological safety can be directly attributed to variations in compassionate leadership. So it really does show a strong association. Further, the qualitative data lends support to these results, with 80% of the interview respondents sharing observations which support the notion that compassionate leadership does indeed have a positive relationship with psychological safety. All right, so for hypothesis 3, so to test this hypothesis, as I mentioned before, I used the Andrew Hayes macro and did a mediation analysis. And so essentially, with compassionate leadership as the independent variable, psychological safety as the dependent variable, and symmetrical internal communication serving as the mediator. In summary, the direct effect of compassionate leadership on psychological safety was significant, with a beta of 0.27 and a p-value of less than 0.001 when controlling for symmetrical internal communication. The indirect effect of compassionate leadership on psychological safety mediated by symmetrical internal communication was also significant, with a beta of 0.28. This finding indicates that symmetrical internal communication serves as a partial mediator in the relationship between compassionate leadership and psychological safety, supporting the notion that the positive impact of compassionate leadership on psychological safety is enhanced through symmetrical internal communication. All right, so in testing hypothesis 4, a moderately positive correlation was discovered between compassionate leadership and employee engagement, suggesting that employee engagement increases as leaders exhibit more compassionate leadership behaviors. This relationship accounts for approximately 22% of the variance in employee engagement, highlighting the influence of compassionate leadership on this outcome. with the remaining 78% due to other factors. The qualitative data from the interview participants further reinforced these findings, with 80% sharing experiences that aligned with the hypothesis, highlighting the positive impact of compassionate leadership on employee engagement. While the results suggest that compassionate leadership is a pivotal factor in fostering employee engagement, other variables clearly also contribute. Sorry about that. All right. So last, to test hypothesis 5, mediation analysis was conducted using the Hayes process model, with compassionate leadership as the independent variable, employee engagement as the dependent variable, and psychological safety serving as the mediator. So first off, the analysis revealed that the direct effect of compassionate leadership on employee engagement was found to be statistically significant, with a beta of 0.09 and a p-value of 0.05, indicating that higher levels of compassionate leadership, to some degree, are associated with increased employee engagement. Further analysis indicates a significant indirect effect with a beta of 0.20, as well measured with a 95% confidence interval of the result being between 0.1126 or 0.2908. Given that that's above 0, it suggests that psychological safety partially mediates the positive relationship between compassionate leadership and employee engagement. Essentially, this finding provides evidence that lends support to the hypothesis. All right. So on to key findings, discussion, and contributions to the practice. All right, so in looking over the results, something that stood out for me was the potentially pivotal role of compassionate leadership as revealed through both the literature and empirical evidence in the study. Contrary to traditional views that might dismiss compassion in the workplace and compassionate leadership as weakness, the study's findings align with recent research asserting the opposite, that compassionate leadership characterized by empathy, integrity, and a commitment to be of benefit to others is a workplace strength, with the study's results suggesting that it may contribute to and support strong and effective communication, like symmetrical internal communication, psychological safety, employee well-being, and ultimately enhance organizational performance. Also revealed through this study is that symmetrical internal communication partially mediates the relationship between compassionate leadership and psychological safety, confirming that the influence of compassionate leadership on psychological safety is enhanced through symmetrical internal communication. And I think this highlights the importance of compassionate leadership behaviors and open two-way dialogues within teams and organizations as key ingredients supporting psychologically safe work environments and teams. Further, this study confirmed that psychological safety partially mediates the relationship between compassionate leadership and employee engagement, highlighting how the influence of compassionate leadership on employee engagement is significantly enhanced through psychological safety. Both the quantitative and qualitative findings validated the proposed hypotheses and build upon an evolving body of research, supporting the shift towards more human-centric leadership styles, such as compassionate leadership. Further, the study highlights the potentially critical role of developing compassionate leadership and enhancing symmetrical internal communication skills for organizational leaders. These competencies seem to play a role in fostering psychological safety and, in turn, employee engagement, a potential pathway to enhanced employee well-being and elevated organizational performance. Further, the study also highlights the significance and potential impact of communication practices characterized by symmetry, transparency, and constructive feedback. These elements support psychological safety, which in turn may enhance employee engagement. I also see an opportunity here to update existing training and/or develop new leadership training sessions aimed at bolstering compassionate leadership behaviors and symmetrical internal communication capabilities as part of efforts to improve psychological safety and, in turn, employee engagement. In terms of contributions to communications management and practice, the strong correlation between compassionate leadership and symmetrical internal communication highlights the importance of empathy, transparency, and accountability in leadership communication strategies. Communications professionals can use the study's findings to develop training and develop programs aimed at fostering leadership qualities, such as those embodied in compassionate leadership that will facilitate symmetrical internal communication across all levels of an organization, which in turn also supports the development of psychological safety in the workplace. Further, given that psychological safety plays a mediating role in the relationship between compassionate leadership and employee engagement, leaders and organizations can explore enhancing employee engagement by creating environments where employees feel safe to express their ideas, concerns, and mistakes without fear of negative consequences. This can include communication training for management on how to respond to employee feedback with empathy and support, encouraging open discussions about challenges and failures, and recognizing and rewarding employees for speaking up and contributing to continuous improvement. All right, so lastly, just some limitations and notes on future research. So yes, there were a few limitations, so I'll get into those. So the use of convenience and snowball sampling limits the generalizability of my findings. Further, the study relied on self-reported perception data to measure the level of these constructs in the workplace at a point in time, which definitely limits the ability to infer causality as well. Some of the advertisements used to recruit volunteer participants on social media channels were paid promotion, which does target an audience of prospective participants that may have a natural interest in the topics associated with the research, meaning there was likely some selection bias and response bias in the sample that may have skewed the results. Future research would definitely benefit from a more robust sampling strategy across a more diverse sample spanning various industries and cultural contexts to test the applicability of the relationships between these constructs more broadly. Additionally, longitudinal studies could offer a deeper understanding of the relationships. In conclusion, the study highlights compassionate leadership's critical role in potentially enhancing symmetrical internal communication, cultivating psychological safety, and ultimately boosting employee engagement. These findings not only contribute to the academic literature by clarifying the mechanisms through which leadership behaviors may impact organizational dynamics and outcomes, but also offer practical guidance for leaders and organizations striving to create more inclusive, engaged, and high-performing workplaces. So with that, I just want to thank a few people. Working on this has been an extraordinary effort. So first and foremost, a big thank you to my Capstone supervisor, Dr. Hania Yousafpour. And thank you so much for all your guidance. Great questions and for keeping me moving forward with this research. Dr. Terry Flynn as well for your guidance and support throughout this program and for agreeing to be my second reader. And of course, Dr. Alex Savini for introducing me to the wonderful world of data science and for all your support as well throughout the program, and really to all the MCM faculty and instructors who have got me to this point. I've learned and grown so much in this program, as well to my MCM 15 cohort colleagues who are an amazing group, as well as shout out to MCM 13 who I started with, and then did take a pause there for a while, but they were wonderful as well as all the MCM 14 and 16 folk that I've had a chance to meet. And special thanks to my all the participants in my survey, as well as the people who agreed to do the interviews. This wouldn't have been possible without them. And special thanks to my partner, Rupert, who is on the call, as well as my daughter, Sophia. Rupert has given me unconditional support, and I really appreciate him and love him dearly. And I think about my daughter, it makes me want to cry, but I just love you so much, Sophia. And thank you for being patient with me to complete this work. Anyways, I told myself I was not going to cry, but I am. Anyways, thank you, Sophia. I love you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Anyways, that's it.
Hey, well, thank you very much for excellent presentation. And I see that I have a halo here, which Yeah, very well done. And now without further ado, we turn it over to your thesis advisor for the first question.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Alex, and thank you, Nicole. Great presentation, good summary of all the hard work that you have done. So congratulations on that part. And just to start off, my first question is, you looked at compassionate leadership, the effect on psychological safety, and then essentially the positive impact on employee engagement. So my question is that throughout your research, was there any other factor that you found that would either moderate that relationship or would contribute to a psychological safety that is worth exploring in the future research?
Oh, I see. So any other factors, like anything else that came out in the research that, yeah, I think I definitely saw that trust is one that I think is really key that could be looked at in a lot more detail. And so I did sort of see that come through in the research a little bit. And I didn't spend too much time focusing on that for this presentation or for this paper. So I think trust is definitely one of the things I would potentially look into in greater detail as, I guess, one of the influences, and perhaps to try to figure out, which variables that is potentially more strongly associated with, like, yeah, so that was one for sure that came up. I can't think of really any others off the top of my head, but trust is definitely one I did think of exploring in greater detail, but just did not, I had to keep things a bit narrow. Yeah.
No, that's fantastic. I mean, that's an important variable to look at, and it is a part of some of the bigger components that you have measured. And then my second question is that because you got the survey from 265 people, but interviewed 10, and there's some overlap. But if you were to summarize, like, one thing that really just came out from the interviews and more the qualitative research that you found interesting or you think is worth further exploring?
Absolutely. So with the interviews, so there was only 10, but what's really struck me in their interviews, so there was mixed sentiment. So I had, several people that described experiences that were in some cases quite traumatic, where they really were in environments with low levels of communication, lack of care, and you could tell based on their tone and how they were explaining things, they really felt disengaged. Others who were quite the opposite. But what I did notice with all of them was the need to feel valued, the need to feel seen, and cared for. Like one particular interview that stands out for me was this person who I guess had just recently had a change in supervisor. And so it was really interesting because they had this very fresh memory of how they felt working for their previous supervisor compared to their new supervisor. And what they explained, and it was sort of interesting, was just that my previous supervisor would, when we would meet, would ask me things about who I am, like would, found out that I liked fishing and found out that I liked, there's, things about my life that are important to me. And that act of just caring and inquiring and learning about them really helped them feel connected to their supervisor in this really interesting, enduring way. And when he described his new supervisor, he's like, yeah, he's good. He's great in a sense that he, in many ways, I don't have anything to complain, but I don't feel like he cares about me. And that makes that I don't feel as engaged and as motivated to do my job, because I just don't feel this sense of connection. And so anyways, that's something in different ways I saw throughout the interviews, whether positive sentiment towards workplace or negative sentiment towards workplace, this desire to feel connected and to feel cared for. And yeah, so I mean, I think that would be something for sure that I took away from the interviews. It was harder to, in analyzing the interviews, when we're talking about things like mediation, to try to find evidence for mediation through interviews. But certainly from a sentiment perspective and the trends in which how people spoke, I mean, people who are very positive about their workplaces environments did tend to have high levels of symmetrical internal communication, signs of compassionate leadership behaviors. They tended to have more psychologically safe environments, or at least the signs of those. And then those who did not have positive experiences, who were less engaged, definitely seemed to have the opposite, you know, sort of essentially validating some of what we saw with the statistical analysis.
Okay. All right. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Back to you, Alex.
Thank you. And now we'll move on to your second reader, Dr. Flynn.
Congratulations. First of all, this is a huge lift. This is a heavy lift, and I haven't seen a capstone presentation with these many statistical analyses or reference to Cronbach's alpha. You know, and I have this desire to ask you the question that a panel of panelists on my PhD said, why did you use Cronbach's alpha? Why did you use McDonald's omega? I don't know. Why I did. Anyways, so congratulations. Well done that way. And, you know, huge N, 256. That's a pretty big N, and 10 interviews, very substantial in that way. So you obviously have something here, and you have significant findings that way. But I want you to imagine yourself about this time next year presenting to the Bridge Conference in Washington, D.C. And the Bridge is both academic and high-level professional. Right. And I want you to imagine the first question coming from a chief communication officer of a multinational corporation said, well, Nicole, that was very interesting. Didn't understand half of it. But so give me the highlights. Give me the top 5 things I should take away from your research that I can put in place in our internal communications that can build a better company for us.
Yeah, so absolutely. So I hear you loud and clear. This is a lot. Yeah, I mean, in terms of what, I mean, I'd say the focus, there's a lot I would say, but I think what is really important is that people feel cared for, and that there's integrity, there's transparency and communication. I mean, this particular research, I'm really looking at the intersection of, I'd say, compassion, not just compassionate leadership. I mean, it's really, I mean, that's the construct I looked at, but, you know, it's about how leadership and how leaderships communicate impacts an organization, right? And so what I would say is, you know, if it's looking at how do we take some of the compassionate leadership, you know, behaviors and things that, you know, are essentially supporting things like symmetrical internal communication. We know that symmetrical internal communication is desirable. It tends to foster trust. It tends to do all the things we want to see happen in a workplace environment. And so knowing that, we can see that some of the, you know, these compassionate leadership traits seem to support that. You know, in our workplace environments, are there ways to look at improving the training and the guidance that we provide leaders on how to communicate effectively? Is there anything missing? I mean, maybe if we look at that guidance right now, maybe there's there's key variables that are missing that we can find in compassionate leadership, and we can update that. So I think there's a lot here. I personally, in full vulnerability, I'm still sorting through. It's a lot of data. Like, I feel like I could find a whole bunch of more findings digging into it. But that's just sort of scratching the surface there. Yeah, so I hope that helps.
Alex, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, it was great. It was great to see that you did use a lot of data and statistics, which was really nice to see, actually. And I was just wondering if you could walk me through just how that went. How did you construct your research model, and what were the kind of steps that you took, and what was hard?
It was very hard. Absolutely. So it was hard because I don't typically do this type of research. I got the thought to engage on this journey when I was doing initial research to come up with my capstone. I mean, obviously, as I mentioned in the beginning, my general interest in this area. But when I was researching, I saw some papers that did do moderation and mediation analyses, and I thought, well, that's interesting. So I was kind of looking at how they were doing it. And then I was aware that, there's some certain gaps in my understanding of how to do that. So I took a course through the University of Calgary. It's like an online course on mediation and moderation analysis that Andrew Hayes, who actually created that macro, which I used for the mediation. So I took a course and sort of decided as a bit of a side project to, learn as I go, so to speak. So as I did this work, I was learning. So it was a lot of research. I was a lot of looking at things online, cross-validating, seeing where I was at. Does this make sense? What else do I have to look at? There's a lot I wasn't able to put in the presentation as far as my process. So, the cron box alpha was one thing, because I wanted to make sure that the questions that I included had internal validity, or else there's no point really. But then also did some assumptions checks with the response data, just to make sure that the data itself is valid for doing like a Pearson correlation, and learned that you can't just do it. There's certain things that need to be in place for it to even potentially be valid. So I had to make sure that those were in place. And then as I was getting the results, I was like, okay, what's a p-value? I have to go figure out what that is. Okay, research, looking at that, understanding that. So definitely a lot of the existing research that I looked at across different fields, I saw examples of it. And so sort of used that as a guide. And just worked my way through. And then as well, my capstone supervisor, Hania, would be like, okay, you have to describe this a bit differently, or that doesn't quite land. And so I sort of had to iterate and make sure things were done the way that they should. So I think there were times where I was thinking to myself, oh boy, this didn't need to be this hard. But it was also really fun in a way. I enjoyed the process of learning this. And yeah, I think I'm proud of myself for doing it. So yeah, it was a process for sure.
That's great. I mean, you pulled it off. I read your paper, and it's nicely done, actually. And I'm glad that the data science course inspired you to go down that quantitative road. Demystified it enough that you felt comfortable when went and did it. So good.
It did help. It did help, Alex. I will say, absolutely. It sort of lit the fire.
Yeah. It's amazing how accessible these methods actually are. If you just, it's
true. It's true. And even the tools, and I like using tools. So, and it doesn't those things do tend to come easier to me, but even with SPSS, at first I was a little scared, but once I got using it, it was kind of fun, and in vivo as well.
Great. So, Dr. Yousufpour, do you have any further questions?
No, I think we have so many presenters. It would be good to open the floor to some of the other participants.
Yeah, Dr. Flynn, any other questions? Oops, muted.
So one last question. So what are you going to do with this now? How will you share this with our community? How will you share with this profession? There's lots of good information here, but it's not good if it
Yes.
just sits in your computer.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I'm going to take a break from it for a few days, but I will say I'm actually very excited to do some interesting things with it. I love writing and communicating, so I'm really looking to taking these findings, making them accessible. I'm thinking of writing some, sort of blog articles, pieces about it, sharing those in small digestible formats to help leaders and communication professionals in some ways with some of these findings in a very accessible way. And also looking as well at seeing if there's opportunities to contribute to creating guides and possibly training programs and things to support managers and leaders to create environments that have higher levels of psychological safety, which we know based on the research tend to create more innovative environments as well. And employee engagement is always a good thing. It's good for people. They feel happier, and it's win-win. It's win for the people, win for the organizations. So exploring that space and looking at what I can do to contribute in that space is something that really excites me.
Great. So now we do have we have about 3-4 minutes, maybe 5 to go to the gallery. Any questions, folks, for our presenter, defender? Or comments? Wow, unusual silence. Okay, going once, going twice.
I think they make like like they pledge to each other. I won't ask you a question if you don't ask me a question. And then they have to hold that true after they leave, right?
That's funny. It could be. I mean, we've had some pretty interesting questions and conversations from the gallery in the past, but it's been pretty quiet the last few. So you could be right. There's some sort of,
maybe it's Monday morning. It's just
they wanted to create a psychologically safe place for Nicole to present.
Right. Okay. Okay, well, that being the case, any further questions from Drs. Yousufpour or Flynn?
No.
I think it's good.
Good. All right. So we shall now retreat. Yeah. Oh, Terry's setting up Terry's the master at this.
Rooms are now open, so you should be heading off there. So please accept the invitation to go into the room. Then we'll bring you back when we are done.